All right, welcome everyone. If you're able to at home here, I got a little presentation that will work a lot better if you also joined in with the presentation. So if you go to oslides.com and enter that code, or if you're able to utilize your phone to scan the QR code, because this will help me better explain IBL, all right, inquiry-based learning. So if you're able to do that, that'd be super wonderful with that part. Don't worry, there's no final exam on this part, so everyone passes already on that. So. All right, I'll get started up with this. As I see that we got a couple of people online here, so hopefully all of you are able to log in and participate with this part, because this is going to be real fun stuff here. Just kind of show you on that part. All right, so good morning. My name is Mark Rakowski. I've been an instructor for 30 plus years. I know it doesn't look like it, but I'm also a full-time instructor with ECC for the CIS department. And I'm just brand new as a full-time instructor here. I've been a adjunct instructor for a good couple of years at different colleges and the last 5 years at ECC. And one of my interests and passions is basically, how we learn. And, I wish some of the feeder schools would include, learning strategies, learning techniques, because I don't know about all of you guys, but I see that students, some students need that additional knowledge in terms of learning. Some students do very well, other students, not as much. All right, so some thoughts here. Are we preparing our students for a standardized test, or are we preparing them for life? So, some questions to think about. And then are we teaching them, what to think, or basically teaching them how to think? All right, so if learning is not engaging, now is it truly learning? So kind of, food for thought on these particular concepts here. So overall, my objectives are going to be, what is IBL, how to utilize IBL, and basically, thoughts on learning. So I thought this was basically kind of cool. So I kind of created a little commercial in terms of IBL, because it sounds like a some kind of medication that you need.
Are your students experiencing symptoms of passive learning syndrome? Do they suffer from chronic classroom boredom, low levels of engagement, weakened curiosity reflex, and the fear of complex concepts? If you answer yes to any of these questions, ask your doctor or educational specialist if IBL is right for them. IBL is not just a teaching method, it's a powerful active learning formula designed to ignite curiosity and boost brain health. IBL works by turning learners into explorers, fueling intrinsic motivation, deeply understanding naturally, build real-world problem-solving skills, and making learning more memorable. IBL works with the brain's natural ability to learn processing, encourage questioning, investigate, and discovery. Side effects may include sudden student enthusiasm, a sudden urge of asking why, and development of lifetime love of learning. IBL trainers are saying that for most part, and we have to overall have a very classroom and teacher training. So it's very time to practitioner.
All right, I don't know, how did the audio, I mean, did this audio and the music and that transfer over on the online side there? Okay, maybe I need to, there's a different setup over here that I got, so all right, that's cool. So I know what to do with it. All right, so how about this one? How about some questions here? So how familiar are you with the IBL, the inquiry learning process here? Okay, very cool. Now, the reason I'm basically doing this technique is because I'm reinforcing in terms of the whole concept here. So when I teach my classes, I pretty much utilize something like Slides or even Kahoot on that part. So instead of doing basically those boring PowerPoints, I mean, it's just awesome that Kahoot and Slides, came into play as a significant learning tool. Because instead of me basically, on the screen talking about stuff, blah, 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 I'm able to interact with the students and basically figure out which topics or which sections of a specific module they understand and don't understand. So that's basically where the inquiry-based learning comes into play. All right, next question here. All right, is IBL teacher-centered? Oh, awesome. Yeah. No, it's not teacher-centered. All right, next one. Oh, next one here. IBL encourages students' questions. Yeah, of course it does. Awesome. Awesome. All right, next question here. Which skill is developed through IBL? You knock it out of the park, right? Critical thinking. All right, next one here. What role does the teacher play? Awesome. How long does it take to learn the answers to a question? Yeah, it definitely depends on the complexity. So as I'm going through these particular questions in the presentation and in the coursework and that, depending basically how students answer the questions, I'm going to basically adapt my learning style and technique to further elaborate on a specific topic, because I know that they're not going to have enough knowledge on that. And then, once I get done with the question part, then I move on basically to a presentation that I have in greater detail. The other thing that I do, basically, let me see if I'm able to scoot this over to my main screen here. Oh, let me do this. And scoot this over here. All right, so the other thing I end up doing basically is I got my iPad configured set up here. So if you're able to see my iPad, and instead of, again, utilizing PowerPoints, I basically give them and create worksheets, give them those worksheets, and I basically also draw things out. So, I'm reinforcing them to take the notes, while I'm lecturing as well. Because, admit it, that PowerPoints are good up to a certain point. This basically, reinforces, the importance of highlighting things. So and the other reason I'm utilizing this technique as well is because I'm able to pace myself in terms of writing the information. So the students are basically also, writing the info as well. So I'm not talking too fast and they're not able to absorb those particular concepts. All right, next question here. What is neuroplasticity? Now we're getting into some interesting topics here. Yeah, the brain's ability to adapt. Well, I got real smart people in here. And this is cool. The synapse, all right? So in the brain, we're gonna have basically little connections in that, and that's how the information passes, and that's how we end up basically building up memory. All right, next question here. When the brain neurons miswire in development, what is the most likely general result? Is the voice on the thing going okay? All right, and this one here. All right, the congenitive function is going to be impaired. All right, another question here, and then we have a little thing here. Regarding memory, what's most likely the outcome if memory circuits are wired incorrectly? Yeah, exactly. So let's see if this is going to work a little bit better than the other one here. So I'll see if the audio is going to transmit a little bit better with this one here. Because again, I mean, I do a lot of research in terms of, brain learning function and stuff like that. So here's a little snippet of a presentation.
Now, what you're looking at here are two neurons that I filmed in a petri dish connecting. Incredible hand-like structures here are called growth cones, and every neuron has one. They actively sense the environment around, and they help each and every one of the 86 billion neurons in your brain find the correct place to connect to. Now, when things go wrong with that wiring process, when it doesn't happen in the usual way, you can end up with things like issues with learning and memory.
All right. But it's very cool. I mean, she was able to get, those neurons in a petri dish on that part. So you could see how memory, elements of that work. I mean, it's just cool. All right, next little segment here in terms of talented people in that. So let's take a look to see about talented people. Why do you think people are extremely talented? A little bit all over the board. Very cool. Bottom line, it's going to be practice. All right, next one here. Are their ability to learn declines at what age? Our ability to learn declines at what age? The answer may surprise you. Okay, yeah. Believe it or not, all right, so from the presentation so she says 5. We'll take a look at that in a moment here. Another important thing, would you consider yourself a multitasker? And I always ask this of my students. Ooh, okay. I do have to say that I at one point considered myself as a multitasker, but the thing is, you are not multitasking, all right? You are basically shifting your thoughts, your focus on different activities. So you're basically doing time slicing. So it may seem like you're multitasking, but the focus is totally lost once you get sidetracked a little bit. And there's a lot of research on that part. So let's take a look at this real quick.
Now, have you met someone who's incredibly talented and you just thought, okay, they must have some magic thing about them that the rest of us don't have? Well, what if I told you that that's probably not true? It mostly comes down to practice, perseverance, and when in development they started learning that skill. And people like Serena Williams and Beethoven, they weren't born with their skills. They practiced, and they all actually started by age 5. So really our ability to learn kind of goes downhill after age 5. But it certainly gets harder through our childhood, through our teens, and once we hit our mid-20s, it gets exponentially harder to learn. Did you know that exercise can actually increase the size of the part of your brain involved in learning and memory? It also helps you make new brain cells. And studies have shown that regular exercise improves memory, it improves cognition, so your ability to think, and just 20 minutes of moderate exercise, so not even, intense exercise, that will actually improve your attention for about 2 hours afterwards.
All right, so again, she brings up some interesting points on that part. And again, I wish that, the feeder schools would invest in the class or something along the lines in terms of, learning concepts, the whole idea of exercise, as well as invoking a good habit of practicing. All right, next set of questions here. What's widely considered to be best activity to boost memory and brain cell growth? Exercise, okay. How about this one here? If you want to choose one lifestyle habit for better brain power and memory, which would be the top choice? Exercise again. Now, you notice that I'm basically repeating and rephrasing the question. So as I'm doing some lectures and I want to basically reinforce a specific topic or a very specific concept, I would basically rephrase the question slightly differently, but still have the same answer to it, just like what I did here. So using IBL there. So how many of you utilize questions or start out the class by utilizing questions? Okay, so again, the whole idea behind this is, well, hang on, let me do the next question here. Would you use Kahoot in class or Slides by any chance? Okay. For me, I mean, the students, I mean, all the classes that I teach, they know right away when I set up class, I go over what the course objectives are, what we're going to be learning, the topics, etc. And they know that basically by default, I basically utilize, Kahoot or Slides. So their computers are ready to rock and roll. And we start basically doing the questions through the Kahoot again. So that's basically part of, the IBL process I end up utilizing. And again, it just helps me to understand what they know or don't know, so that I'm able to elaborate more on a certain topic. How about this one? For what to use Kahoot and Slides in class? So what's the purpose, or what elements did you end up utilizing it? Okay. Yeah, I mean, I utilize it for a combination of, the lectures as well as the exams, as well as certain things for homework. So, I rely on this quite a bit. When do you use the Kahoot or Slides in class? You know what? That's kind of a repeat on that one. So, okay, so why do this particular method? So, if one, it grabs the student's attention. It basically then shows the students of what they know or don't know. So once I get into the actual presentation part, it helps them trigger in terms of, here's what I did not know, here's what I did know. So it's just basically a reinforcement tool. So I mean, I got that attention grabber on that part. So here's another little thing, she talks about it grabbing attention here.
But the good news is I'm going to tell you what you can actually do about it, because there are things you can do. You can use attention, alertness, sleep, repetition, breaks, and mistakes.
So basically what she's getting at is what her findings were in terms of, you know, how we learn. And I add a couple more things to it, especially with the attention and then the repetition portion.
So first things first, in order to learn, well, we need to pay attention, right? Attention is a really important function. So for example, if I was to ask you to close your eyes and focus on your contact between the feet and the floor, you'll suddenly be aware of maybe the texture of your socks, maybe how tight your shoes are, maybe how firm the floor is. And you're not aware of any of that a second ago. And what that means is that we have the ability to choose how much attention we pay to something.
All right, so this is an important part here, and this is why I'm bringing up the whole aspect of, you know, if we're multifunctioning or multitaskers on that part. Because when you have, you know, laser focused attention, and I know it's, you know, difficult to do. I mean, I've been teaching for a long time, and that instinction to basically, you know, students trying to grab their phone and you know, and what, you know, one of the things I basically do in my classes is like first day, you know, I lay down the law. It's like, right, if you have to basically grab your phone for an emergency, you know, escort yourself out. All right. Otherwise, you know, put your phones away. I mean, show me some respect, your classmates respect on that part. You know, if you feel that the class is boring in that you don't need this class, just leave and drop the class. I mean, I'm just being blatantly honest, and it kind of, you know, it triggers the students like, all right, you know, this guy means business, which you know, I want them to learn. You know, to me, it's a huge distraction when I see basically students on their phone when I'm basically, you know, doing a job. I'm trying to help them learn. So on occasion, I had to stop the class. So let's continue on with this.
Focus on task. We're much more likely to retain that information, especially for the long term.
So everyone's going to have their techniques here. So one thing that I end up doing is on various topics that are a little bit more involved, I kind of give them a little bit of a background, and that also helps reinforce, you know, some specific topics that I'm trying to present on.
Now, until the last little blip in human history, we have never had to work this hard to pay attention. Like, let's be honest, how many times do you find yourself rereading or replaying something because you got a bit distracted, right? Yeah, we're designed to focus on one thing at a time. There's no secret that the frequent context switching that happens when we use social media, so scrolling through our phones and seeing lots of different bits of completely unrelated bits of information like news, ads, you know, cat videos, that results in significantly measurable attention deficits. So I'm not saying it causes ADHD, but studies have shown that if you use your phone for more than an hour in teens, that results in these attention deficits. Did you know that exercise can actually increase the size?
All right, cool. All right, next particular subject is going to be on repetition. So I'm not going to go through all the elements that she was talking about. I just want to point out some key things on this part. So let's look at this. So the role of the neurotransmitter. So it's going back to reinforcing this part, right? Again, they're chemical signals, messengers that carry signals across the synapses, right? So the increased repetition can lead or does lead in terms of higher concentrations and making those transmitters, right, stronger, right? That's why the whole role of basically repetition and practice, right? So again, this is, you know, reinforcing that the practice portion of it reinforces, you know, those connections. So the more that you do it, I mean, the brain becomes more efficient at performing a task through practice. So a lot of us are instructors. First time we taught a class, you know, it was a little, you know, probably needed improvement, but as we teach the class, multiple times, it basically becomes automatic. I mean, you already know what to do, everything out in that part, again, because we've done it so many times. All right, another question over here. Forgetting curve best illustrates which phenomenon related to the human memory. Now I got that one song in my head, phenomenon, right? Yeah, fading of the memory on that part, right? Next one here. According to the forgetting curve, when does most of the significant drops in memory retention typically occur after learning the new material? So how long of a drop off is that retention? Pretty much immediately. And there's other factors. So I got another little video snippet that's going to talk about some other factors with that. To effectively combat with the forgetting curve and improve long-term memory retention and learning strategy, what learning strategy supported by research related to the forgetting curve? Yeah, spaced repetition and review. I remember, also being back in the college years and that, I do the so-called mass cramming, and yeah, that didn't work out too well. All right, so here, I mean, what's the difference between, this guy, right, Michael Jordan, and basically students? Literally, there's nothing. I mean, why is there a huge emphasis on practicing on something that is physical? And there's not enough emphasis on practicing in terms of learning. So that always kind of like boggled my mind. People are willing to spend, hours and hours, doing something physically. But when it comes to learning, there's a small percentage of students that actually do that. So there is no difference. It's just, we need to basically start, I guess, encouraging the students that, this learning by practice works. All right, another question here. What's the benefit of IBL? All right, so as you can see, one of the things I'm doing with the quizzes here is, again, I'm trying to reinforce certain concepts. So as I'm going through my presentations, I'll be basically, again, adding some additional questions, reinforcing, rewording certain concepts. Because, first time around on a specific topic, maybe I get, 50% of the people answering the question correctly. And then as we're going through the course, and the same date, a little bit of a spacing, more people are picking up on the certain bullet points. And then, the next day, we have a new topic, but I'm going to reintroduce some of the questions that I know students always have trouble learning because it's a new concept, something they've never experienced. So sometimes a specific concept, I basically have over 3 or 4 lectures in terms of, not a lecture, but in a quiz question. All right, next question here. What's the goal of IBL? Right, enhance critical thinking on that part. So again, I'm just, reinforcing the different concepts here. All right, next one here. Which of these is emphasized with IBL? The questions, all right? So again, when I basically reword certain topics or, the questions, so students are able to get the right answer, the more times I present the question, again, it's just, that whole dopamine effect on that. And not only that, I mean, Kahoot, being a game, but, there's a lot of research that when you're interacting like this, I mean, it just triggers certain elements in thinking. So again, the core principles here of IBL are going to be student-centered, active learning, critical thinking, exploration, questioning, as well as problem solving. So that's what I'm trying basically to do in all my classes. So again, I'm reinforcing, the way that people learn and, show the students that, I'm pretty sure the students, say that I have a ton of quizzes. Which I do. I mean, I start out with quizzes. The quizzes that I have in D2L, we have a whole bunch of questions, and I'm not sure how everyone has their classes set up, but my quizzes are set up that students are able to retake those quizzes. Because when in my industry, in terms of certifications, we have exams that we take or these certifications, and what do the students do? They buy some kind of practice test and they review the questions over and over and over again. So for me, for the students to have the ability to retake the quiz is important. Not only that, I'm able to set up in D2L that I have basically a quiz bank. So the second time they retake the quiz, they might have a new set of questions.
Now, the old adage says that practice makes perfect, but there's so much truth to that because repetition is key when it comes to learning. Repetition is key when it comes to learning. It's not enough to just hear or see something once and expect to remember it forever. Just like exercising builds muscle, repetitive patterns of thinking or doing things will reinforce those pathways and those connections in the brain associated with doing that thing. So it'll become easier to recall. So through the process of neuroplasticity, you're making these brand new connections, right? And that takes energy, requires fatty acids, requires lots of little proteins to be made. It's a big job, it takes a lot of energy. And the brain's not going to want to invest all of this energy in creating these new connections if it's something that you've only done once, right? That is why repetition is so important for learning. It's basically flagging to your brain at the cellular level that, hey, this is the thing that keeps coming up in my life. So in order to be more efficient, I need to reinforce this and do it better. So here's what you should do. Repeat the thing that you are trying to learn as many times as you can in that learning period. And use the spacing technique. So space your learning out over multiple days. So that way your learning has a chance to build on those new long-term memories.
We get spaced out learning as we're aware of it, and there is.
And it basically happens when there's a really strong emotional component tied to that experience. So for example, it makes us really.
All right, so the next part that she's gonna be talking about is there are certain elements that, we're gonna remember stuff day one. I mean, we're never gonna forget that instance. Now, unfortunately, sometimes those instances are more of a tragic type of nature. So for those people that were around when 9/11 happened, right? If I ask you, where were you when you first heard the news? I mean, probably you won't ever forget that part. But see, when it comes down to learning, I mean, we don't always want to basically create these, states of emergency. So pay attention to what she has to say now.
Really sad or scared, especially if it makes us afraid, actually. And there's a really important biological reason for that if you think about it. So your brain wants to remember in exquisite detail everything to do with that scary event. So that way you know how to respond next time you encounter it, or just so you can avoid it completely. And when things go wrong with that process, we can end up with things like PTSD.
It all makes sense when, you know, what was stated there. Now, the other thing is, I also have a huge use of analogies in my course. So let's look at some of the questions here. Which memory method improves for knowing and for linking information to existing knowledge is best described as? Analogy. So one of the things that I also do is when I set up the topics and that, I basically, you know, reinforce, you know, some of the questions to the answers back to the topic. So, you know, when they're thinking, they're reading through the answers and selecting the correct answer. All right, a couple more questions here. In the contents of learning, brain processing and memory are most effectively strengthened by employing which cognitive approach? Right, the use of analogies, exactly. Okay, and when designing a learning tool to aid understanding and memory through relatable comparisons, what is the most important element to prioritize that? Right, again, analogy. So you can see how I basically incorporate all that in that particular topic here. Then what learning approach focuses on making connections to enhance understanding and memory rather than just memorizing facts? Again, yeah, employing the analogies on that part. So here's a little segment here on analogy.
True value and power of creating an analogy comes from trying to make it as simple and as broad and accurate as possible. Let me give you some examples. So previously, I said that an analogy is like building a bridge between new information and old information.
Yeah, exactly. So, you know, in my line of work in terms of IT, there's a lot of new concepts. So I try to basically build on, you know, knowledge and experience that students may already have experience and kind of tie in different elements. So for example, when you go on a web browser and you hit a web page, it shows up. But what happens behind the scenes? So I explain how that process works, no different than basically, you know, purchasing something from Amazon. And I go through the process. I mean, because when we purchase something from Amazon, it just shows up at the door. But I explain basically the whole process behind the scenes. Our order gets basically sent over there. So there's, you know, step 1, step 2, step 3. And then basically relate back to what happens on the internet when you hit basically a web page. So, and then they got the concept a little bit more because, you know, anything technology wise, it just happens magically somehow. Note taking. All right, a couple questions on this here. When taking notes to really remember the information long term, which note taking style is generally considered most effective for memory? Yes, absolutely. So that's why, you know, when I do different elements in my class here, did I lose my screen here? So when I do different elements here, I basically, when I describe concepts, I basically create a lot of worksheets, little handouts for the students. So again, we're able to kind of trace things. And unfortunately, in the books and the materials that I have, especially in the technology stuff, there's not enough diagrams to help kind of like solidify certain concepts, because we end up basically learning better and memorizing things through a diagram.
Take the main idea of this and then turn it into something visual. An image, a flow chart, a diagram, or a mind map. I can look at a visual and within seconds get the gist of what it's about. So tip number one is to make more visual notes, because not only does the brain remember images better than words, it also processes them faster. The next tip is to understand that notes are meant to be an extension of your thinking, not a replacement. Here's what I mean. So imagine that your brain is carrying a load. This is called cognitive load. So you're sitting in class and the teacher is lecturing and feeding you info, metaphorically adding weight to this load. Your brain's job is to process it, ask questions, make connections, piece the information together, properly think about it. So when a load of information starts to become too much to handle, then you jot some notes down and you offload the excess information to keep track of it, but you want to use your notes as an extension of your thinking.
Yeah, and unfortunately, a lot of students, they don't do that component here. Instead, they end up doing something like this.
Challenging. The only way you're going to learn is by struggling with the info in your brain at a reasonable level, of course. And that struggle is what learning feels like. But what many students do wrong is that they offload everything immediately to the notes. The info comes from the teacher to your brain and then directly to your notes. You don't give your brain any chance to process it. You don't embrace that uncomfortable feeling of learning. Many students do this because they're afraid of missing information, so they're going to frantically write it all down. The info is basically bypassing the brain too quickly, and you don't learn anything. So if you made a commitment to go to class, then use that time effectively by learning the information right there and then, rather than writing it down and then postponing your learning until after class. Plus, if you understand what's being taught, then you'll end up taking better notes. The next step is to not over-rely on your notes as a study guide. A lot of students will read their notes to review for an exam, and they think that the more times they read it, the more prepared they'll be. But that's not how it works, because rereading notes just gives you the illusion of learning. You feel like you're absorbing the information. You're not actually retaining it. Think about your favorite movie. Can you recall every scene in that movie in order, straight from memory? It's a lot harder than it seems, right? Even for your favorite movie. But if you have that movie playing right in front of you, then it becomes a lot easier to recall the scenes because they're all familiar to you. That's what rereading your notes is like. It gives you the illusion of learning. But when you close your notes and try to recall them, like picture the movie playing out in your mind, it's not that easy.
Yeah, so I mean, that's an important element. And again, we need to kind of focus on helping students learn. As I see, so many students writing down a whole bunch of notes on that part. And sometimes I see students, I don't know how they do it, right? But the grade shows that they're not even taking notes. So it's like, do they have a photographic memory or not? The notes basically, or the amount of effort that I see that they're putting in kind of reflects back in terms of what they're getting in terms of their grade. All right, two more questions here. What's the primary cognitive benefit of actively taking notes during a lecture while reading in terms of how it affects your learning process? Exactly, right? So deepening of information processing and retaining that. I'm going to skip this. I'm going to go to this portion of note taking here. So this is actually quite interesting because again, I'm getting, doing research on a lot of different elements on here. And I could tell you this from experience, back when I was in college and in high school, I'd take notes. And, I came to realizations like, why am I taking notes? Because, I'm getting good grades in that. So it's like, what's the point? One semester, I basically stopped taking notes and well, it reflected back on my grade. So, the action of note taking, even though I did not reference my notes from that point on, I mean, there was a huge learning component just by taking handwritten notes. And this individual tells us about it.
Research generally shows that handwriting notes means that you can remember the material better than if you were to just type it. One research study by Mueller and Oppenheimer even showed that students who take lecture notes by hand generally perform better in tests than those who took their notes on a computer. One of the reasons for this is because we can type so much faster than we can write. This means that when we handwrite our notes, we force ourselves to distill the information from the lectures into the information that we think is most important. The main issue when it comes to typing down your notes is that you're likely going to just copy the exact information that's being said without thinking about what it is that you're writing down. Typing notes on a keyboard can be a very passive process where your job as students is just to transcribe everything that the lecturer is saying. Instead of when you take handwritten notes, you can really focus on making high yield notes with only the most important information. It also takes skill to write good handwritten notes. And certainly when I was writing these notes back in 2013 until 2017, I don't think I've quite mastered that skill just yet. You have to be able to condense the information down into something useful and pick out the key information from lectures. So this does mean that you have to practice somewhat or have some experience in taking good.
Yeah, so again, there's not enough emphasis in the schools on that in terms of how to even take notes on that part. So I wish, again, some of the feeder schools would do something like that. So again, the effect of learning and the strategies here. So active recall, self-testing, flashcards. Again, I have a lot of quizzes that I incorporate in my coursework there. So, spaced repetition. So even with when I'm presenting different topics, I'm always basically sneaking in questions from previous topics in the set of questions, or maybe creating another set of questions kind of quickly for review. Is again, that's going to help my students retain the information on that part. Something they come up with dual coding here, verbal and visual, helps. Again, the more information that you get, the better. And then active engagement, taking notes forces for active listening, the process of information and making decisions on going to be what's important and what's not. And the other thing that I end up doing with the students in that, I basically highlight, because if you're able to read a book and memorize the entire book, how do you know what material is going to be more important than other and what you're going to be tested on? So I'm not basically sneaky around, the questions in that. I basically point out, it's like, this is an important concept that you need to remember in that. So, they don't focus on something that is kind of useless information. So in summary, I end up utilizing Kahoot and Slides for my IBL. I do a lot of note taking, especially on my iPad, so the students are able to follow along in terms of the diagrams and everything else. And I have a lot of questions, again, rewarding, making difficulty, different levels of difficulty in terms of the questions. So as we progress, the questions get a little bit harder. And then I also, on various questions, I know where they're going to make the mistakes, and I force them to make the mistakes. Because making mistakes, you end up basically learning a lot better from that part. And obviously utilizing quite a bit of analogies on that part. But here's our score on that part. Any questions? No, anyone?
I guess start with a question too, if I can. So I apologize if I come in a bit late too. If I'm cutting off Zoom folks, let me know. Feel free to Zoom folks cut me off. I'm curious, like with the last slide, especially, Mark, and sort of, oh, here's a lot of ways you approach learning for students. How much do you explain those things to students? So for instance, like if you're doing lots of repetition you're teaching, do you tell students like, oh, I'm repeating this a lot because we know that's how people learn best? Or like even with a note taking, like you provide those kind of videos to students. Oh, here's what we know about effective notes. You all can watch this video and learn. Are those things that you make transparent to students? Those things you keep for yourself?
Depends on the topic. I try to keep it transparent because the whole reason of that is it's just more of a psychology kind of aspect of it. Because I know that there's going to be certain subjects that are going to be a little bit more difficult, a little bit more time consuming to learn because it's a whole different new component. So I know that over like one of my classes is in networking. you know, the whole idea of how the numbering system works, I just can't have one class and that. So that numbering system, you know, it's just basically repeated in different ways over the course of the semester on that part. Because again, there's certain things that students always get mixed up on and that part. So, and then, yeah, certain things in that, you know, I basically say, all right, remember this on that part. Because as so one of the things that you probably missed that I had here was, you know, that I have drawings that I basically utilize worksheets, give them to the students, and I draw with them. All right, so that I'm helping them basically reinforce the information, and also I'm keeping pace in terms of, you know, so I'm not talking too fast and students are, you know, can't comprehend what I'm getting at and stuff like that, so they lose focus. So that's one of the reasons I end up doing that particular method. All right. Good question. Do I teach the students at the beginning of the course on that part? Partially, yes, and then over the course of time, I add more to it. So students that basically have me for the first time, they basically, by week 3, they kind of see my method to my madness on that part. And, you know, overall, I mean, I get fairly decent reviews because of how I do things. And, you know, one of the things that students always say is like, you know, I can't believe how much I know or remember because of the, you know, the methods I basically implemented on that part. Yeah, so, yeah. So again, I reinforce to the students that, you know, during my, you know, introduction to class, you know, I do have some quotes and things along those lines. I reinforce the concept of practicing, and I basically reinforce that these quizzes that I have here, I mean, instead of watching cat videos, I mean, utilize these quizzes. You're able to take them unlimited time. So I sound like a, you know, commercial, you know, on that part. But yeah, yeah, I wish that basically like certain technologies, like D2L and that, I'm able to basically, you know, push questions to their phone and kind of interrupt their cat video watching. It's like, you know, hey, here's a question here, answer this real quick. So I don't know if we're gonna get there eventually, but that'd be kind of cool. All right, any other questions?
One more aspect, in terms of the note taking, my first instructors have kind of mixed responses, do different things with the idea of kind of group notes or having students share their notes with each other. And so do you ever do things like have students share their notes with one another? I know you mentioned kind of showing your examples. Oh, here's what I'm taking notes on. Have you thought about kind of group notes or having students look at each other's notes too, or is that successful, not successful in your thoughts?
That I haven't implemented. One of the things I'm looking to implement, it just matter in terms of, you know, how much time I have in the classroom on that part. One of the things I want to try to incorporate in my classes a lot more is these 5-minute breakout sessions. So if I have basically a topic, it's like, all right, what are your thoughts on this? How do you think this is going to work? And basically, you know, have little pods of, you know, 3 to 4 people, and they, you know, it's like, you know, jot down the notes and that. I mean, obviously, you know, there's always one that's going to be a leader, one's that can, you know, but, you know, I'm just basically helping them, trying to reinforce the ideas and do the critical thinking part. So I haven't done that yet. It's just basically trying to figure out how to incorporate it a little bit better. Because again, I got so much information in my courses and that time for me to spend teaching them a couple of things. I mean, I'm always, you know, at time when class is done. So. All right, cool. Any other ones? All right,
Thank you very much, Mark.
all right, cool. All right, thank you, everyone.